Welcome to our keynote panel discussion, The Future of Hydrogen from the Industry Association Perspective. I'm Adrienne Bloom, Editor-in-Chief of H2 Tech, and I have with me Cornelius Mathis, CEO of DII Desert Energy and the MENA Hydrogen Alliance, and I also have Michelle Detweiler, Executive Director of the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. So today we're going to discuss how hydrogen-focused industry associations and trade groups are leading advocacy efforts for the use and development of low-carbon hydrogen and hydrogen infrastructure around the world. But before we do that, I'd like to ask Cornelius and Michelle to tell us a little bit about their roles at their organizations and also what areas of hydrogen advocacy DII Desert Energy and the RHA are focusing on currently. So first I'll ask Cornelius and then Michelle to speak about their organizations. Cornelius?
Well, thank you very much, Adrienne, for having me. And it's a true pleasure. And it's nice to speak on such a global conference. Well, I'm Cornelius Mathis. I'm the CEO of DII Desert Energy, and we've been around a bit more than 12 years on energy transition topics in the region. So we're industry-led. We've been driving here the energy transition on the green electron front since 2009 in North Africa, Middle East, and connecting markets. And more recently, over the last 4 to 5 years, we've been engaging in hydrogen, and we've launched the MENA Hydrogen Alliance just at the start of last year. And actually, it's been breathtaking, the changes and the massive attention hydrogen has been getting since then. And Dubai has really, where I'm based, become one of the centers of the global energy transition with some of the largest solar projects on the planet with the lowest cost, and obviously here the first green hydrogen project operational already. And what we do is, well, as a platform, obviously, we provide a forum for discussion and we educate stakeholders, particularly public stakeholders, on economic, on technical implications with proprietary models we develop of hydrogen, but also ammonia, transport, and energy transition 360 degrees. So that's basically, and then obviously we engage in different activities and working groups. We have an annual event here, which will be on 11th of November. And we obviously bring together as well different stakeholders to push for specific projects, you know, to create kind of consortia in the background. So that's our job. So looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Great, thanks, Cornelius. So Michelle, please tell us about yourself and RHA.
Thank you, Adrienne. It's very nice to be here. My name is Michelle Detweiler. I am the Executive Director of the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. We are based in Portland, Oregon, and our scope is we advocate and promote the use of renewable energy to produce hydrogen and other climate neutral derivative fuels like ammonia, formic acid, etc. We're an advocacy trade association. We have about 75 members that cover the full spectrum of the hydrogen industry, from electrolyzer manufacturers to clean transportation advocates to utilities and other groups. We are focused mostly on advocating for state policy that furthers the hydrogen industry, particularly the zero carbon or renewable hydrogen industry. In the states of Washington and Oregon is where, in the US, is where we are most active. But the Pacific Northwest region really encompasses the states of Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, and depending on what you're talking about and what you're doing, the province of British Columbia. So we do have counterparts in British Columbia and members that we work with very regularly. And where we are focused on advocacy at the state level is that multi-sector, multi-pronged approach. That's really our focus, is using hydrogen as a multi-sector solution and tool to transition to a clean energy economy. And we are focused, on the transportation sector, we're focused on the power sector, we're focused on the industrial sector. And we just had our first in-person symposium in 2 years up in Washington State. We have been around for about 3 years. We were first formed in about June 2018, and have seen a lot of progress at the state level in state legislation that's really advancing the sector. So at our, I can go into this probably later, but at our symposium last month, we had lots of exciting projects described, including projects being carried out by Microsoft and Mitsubishi and others. So happy to describe those at a later point.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for those introductions. We should have an interesting discussion with the two, different regional perspective here. So I'd like to launch into to speaking about some ideas surrounding what it means to be a trade group or a hydrogen advocacy group, and how that fits into pushing forward the development of low carbon hydrogen use for many different sectors in the energy transition. So according to the perspective shared by your organizations, hydrogen-focused associations and coalitions around the world are very key to advancing hydrogen development and adopting hydrogen solutions and accelerating investment. So in recent years, we've seen Europe, East Asia, and the Middle East commit to investing hundreds of billions of dollars into hydrogen solutions. So with these factors in mind, in what sectors do you see hydrogen as being a true game changer for the regions in which your organizations operate? And I'll ask Cornelius to answer that first, and then invite Michelle.
Yeah, that's a good question, Adrienne. Well, hydrogen 2 years was, I would say, irrelevant, and just through last year with massive national strategies, massive announcements, became one of the hottest topics. And even here in the Gulf, there's been a bit of a time lag. Europe has moved earlier. Most European countries have a national hydrogen strategy, and Europe has. And by the way, we've been delighted to contribute to, co-work with Hydrogen Europe to propose the 2 × 40 gigawatt initiative and submit this, present this to Frans Timmermans, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, the head of the Green Deal, in spring last year. And then, the European Hydrogen Strategy, which was published in July, incorporated some of these main pillars, 40 gigawatt of electrolysis capacity in North Africa and Ukraine, and 40 gigawatt in Europe. And indeed, the numbers are bold. We are talking, as you say, about hundreds of billions. To your question on the low-hanging fruits or the main sectors, I would maybe elaborate a little bit on Europe, and maybe a little bit of here. So our core work is obviously acting as a bridge, like we did for green electrons, on green electricity. Now we do with green molecules, connecting markets and continents here. So it's a lot between Europe and the region. So for Europe, clearly, the sectors which will be immediate large off-takers and have the largest pressure to defossilize in this decade already are, the big CO2 emitters. So steel, very clearly, will be a huge off-taker, and you see all major steel companies already getting positioned in sourcing, huge amounts of green hydrogen in the future. Steel represents 7% of global CO2 emissions. So steel during this decade will be a big off-taker already. Mobility, very clearly, if you talk to the large truck manufacturers, commercial vehicles, long haul trucking, this goes very clearly mainly in the direction of fuel cell mobility and not e-mobility. E-mobility is a big boom, obviously, for just retail applications, but this is a big topic. So talking to the big truck manufacturers, chemistry, and obviously fertilizer production, which as today consumes the largest percentage of hydrogen. So chemistry and fertilizers also are getting positioned and will be a very significant off-taker. So I think these are the main industries, the low-hanging fruits in Europe. In the region here, a little bit different. Obviously, the incentives are different. The region here, as a local market, is not yet so much as a focus. So the focus is rather on export. But countries like Saudi Arabia, they have a circular carbon economy. So there's a big focus, you know, in step by step. Including low carbon hydrogen. NEOM is an export project that's the biggest one here in the region. So the region is mainly focused on export. So in this respect, it's all about, you know, creating local solar wind capacities, in some countries, blue hydrogen applications as well. But actually, there is a prevalence of green hydrogen. And so that's, I think, that the main first focus on export. And then obviously what we looked at with our study, which was published just in June, is on how to create potentially hydrogen valleys, you know, which are a success factor for Europe, the whole chain from generation to logistics to offtake here regionally. So such hydrogen valleys hopefully will play a role in the second part of this decade.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Michelle, so how do you see, in what sectors do you see hydrogen as being a true game changer for the US? And, you know, how does that vary from what Cornelius was speaking about in Europe and the Middle East?
Well, funnily enough, I think it doesn't. I agree with Cornelius that in the U.S., and I can focus mostly on the region that we function in. I would say transportation, fertilizer, and also energy storage. So when just looking at the Pacific Northwest, very, very, very progressive in their energy and climate policies. So, for instance, Oregon and Washington now have three what are kind of considered the premier climate policies, which are 100% clean. California and Washington have a cap and invest program, and then all three states of California, Washington, and Oregon, up and down the West Coast, have low carbon fuel standards for transportation. You know, requiring decreasing carbon emissions over time of mobility fuels. So I see transportation as, you know, or RHA sees transportation as a big opportunity and a low-hanging fruit. And we always stress when we are advocating to the legislatures, you know, don't see EVs, battery EVs and fuel cell electric vehicles as competitors. They're not. There are different applications, different needs, different uses, frankly, different preferences, depending on the fleet, the consumer, the transportation manager, whatever. So we always ask for parity in those policies. You know, whatever you're giving to the electric vehicle, battery electric vehicle industry, please think about us and treat us equally. And we have gotten some pushback a little bit from light duty vehicles for fuel cell technology. But we in the West live in enormous states. I mean, you know, millions and millions of square miles. Not everybody lives in a city. Often the trip to the grocery store to run errands is like, you know, can be 50, 75, 100 miles round trip. Sometimes the battery electric vehicle just doesn't make sense in those applications. Again, because we are rural, we have huge rural areas and lots of agriculture, you know, fertilizer, big producers and big demand for fertilizer in this region. And then energy storage. These climate policies that are pushing mainly the energy sector to be cleaner and be more renewable, you're going to create a lot of surplus renewable energy. We already have surplus solar, surplus wind, and surplus hydroelectric. So being able to capture that power and sustain its value on the market, so that you don't actually have to pay somebody to take it because there's too much on the grid, is really, I think, really key in our particular region.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, so with the targeted applications or the areas of most promise in mind, how are industry groups such as yours leading efforts to establish infrastructure links and to overcome barriers to deployment for hydrogen technologies. Cornelius, would you like to address that question?
With pleasure. Well, it's two relatively different topics. Obviously, infrastructure, we've been working on this for more than 10 years with green electrons in, trying to get the right framework and to get high voltage direct current lines under the Mediterranean. And, for example, Morocco and Spain, they have been connected for some time now. But Egypt, Cyprus, Greece, or between Tunisia and Italy. And this has been always very challenging. The beauty is that, for example, gas infrastructure is already available and is available to a larger extent. And, a gas line can transport basically 10 to 20 times equivalent in terms of green molecules than green electrons. And the cost is probably 1/10 as well if you talk about long-term transmission. So there is actually a convergence between the power grid and the gas grid, and there is plans of the European hydrogen backbone and to really create a hydrogen grid in Europe. And this is all driven by policymakers, and there is clearly a very good drive in this respect. And what we are doing as an organization, we're trying to push governments to think about repurposing, for example, existing gas pipelines between North Africa and Europe, maybe to start with for blending, but potentially, for future use of exclusive hydrogen, or, to look at the economic, the technical feasibility as well of a pipeline here from the Arabian Peninsula to Europe, to pipe green hydrogen, these kind of things, and to show cost dynamics, and to also show the different forms of green molecules, because that's the beauty about hydrogen, that you can convert in ammonia, in green methanol, in other forms as well. Even e-fuels is potentially a topic. So we are going down a little bit this direction. So that's a little bit on the infrastructure side. The second part of the question was exactly. Can you please repeat this?
Sure. So how also is your organization helping to overcome barriers to deployment for hydrogen technology?
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's pretty different. So in terms of hydrogen technology and all of this, so there is different working groups, with political representative, where we first of all educate on the different, solutions available. This is one thing, but then there is very important prerequisites for market development, which are from certification schemes to certify the region, but also safety security standards, for example, also to, first of all, suggest a regulation similar to the one for the gas sector available, which is not existing today, these kind of things. So on standards, that's a very important one. And then, there's many ingredients for trading schemes. We can maybe discuss a little bit later, but that's also a very important point we see. And then obviously there is, a wave of startups and new technology companies, which is doing an amazing job. And, we are creating a forum as well. And with different stakeholders here to provide potential links to prepare business opportunities, to connect the right stakeholders, to explain different funding opportunities, these kind of things. And we are discussing new technologies required here in this respect, to help to push these kind of things.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so, Michelle, how would you say that the Renewable Hydrogen Association is leading efforts to establish infrastructure links and also overcoming barriers to deployment for hydrogen technology?
Well, we in our advocacy, we also ask for money. So when we go to state legislatures, we try to find opportunities for tax incentives, different state appropriations, different funding opportunities, much like Cornelius mentioned. We also work with the local academic and research organizations. So in this region of the U.S., we have Washington State University. We have great universities that are looking. One in particular, Washington State University has a sort of separate group that is working on hydrogen, overcoming barriers like the use of rare earth minerals and metals in electrolyzer technology. And the other thing that we're doing is working with the federal labs. So Pacific Northwest National Labs, which is a lab underneath within the U.S. Department of Energy. We work closely with them on their funding opportunities and their research, different research opportunities. So it's sort of, at this point for us, it's kind of, where can we find the public money, and where can we find those opportunities for just where the R&D is happening and connecting our members with the R&D. And we have utility members, natural gas members, distribution utilities who are experimenting right now with different blending proportions in the natural gas system, because like Cornelius says, we have a natural gas distribution system that is, it's already built, it's already sited, it's already permitted, and in large, and to some degree, it's already, financed. So I think it's an important asset that we shouldn't abandon.
Mm-hmm.
We should
Definitely.
see how we can make it cleaner and more renewable.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions, is if the RHA worked with any of the national or the renewable energy labs, the DOE's NREL labs. So that's interesting to know. It seems like a natural fit. So, all right. And so then my next question is kind of aimed more toward Michelle. So looking at the hydrogen strategies that have emerged around the world. So the US is the only major market without a national hydrogen strategy at present. So how do you think US coalitions and associations can drive a change in policy for this? And what can they do to help establish strategies for hydrogen and related infrastructure development?
Well, I don't know if I would completely agree with the presumption that we don't have a strategy. There is one that is emerging. So, we now have a White House administration that is very focused on climate policy. And so through that, hydrogen has emerged as one of the solutions, one of the tools. So the United States, again, the US Department of Energy has put together something called the Hydrogen Earthshot Initiative. And this is getting green hydrogen down to $1 per kilogram in 1 decade. And this is very similar to what they did in 2010 with what they called the Sunshot. So bringing down the cost of solar power, and they met their goal under that initiative by, I believe, 2016. So that was an initiative where the deadline was 2020, and so they hit it 4 years early. And so we're hoping there's that sort of momentum and that acceleration for hydrogen as well. DOE under that under the Hydrogen Fuel Cell and Technologies Office put out an RFI this summer, a request for information, and they had lots of us from the Pacific Northwest responded to that. And really, what it was looking at was, where would it make sense in the United States to develop a hydrogen hub? And so the department is looking at kind of 4 regions in the United States. We believe the Pacific Northwest is one of them. So they're they're looking at, that sort of investment in regions around the country for for moving the hydrogen economy forward. The next thing is the United States, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that is currently being considered by Congress. There is money in there, again, for hydrogen economy, hydrogen development, looking at different technologies. And so it is a bit of a piecemeal approach compared to what other countries and other regions in the world are doing. But for me, it does feel like it feels like it's getting there to be a national strategy. And what the associations can do, and what we are doing, is we are sort of locking arms. And there are many hydrogen trade associations in the U.S. Many states have their own. There are regional ones and national ones. But suffice it to say that we are all together in writing letters and calling the appropriate policymakers and making our voices heard to say, this is a good idea. We need to move forward. What do you need from us as far as education, information, however it is we can engage, we do and we will. I know RHA is on a monthly call with Dr. Sunita Satyapal, who is the director of the Hydrogen Fuel Cell and Technologies Office. So we hear from what other associations are doing around the country. So it's that sort of education and constant communication and working together to really move this industry forward as fast as we can.
That's fantastic. Also looking at the market that is developing in California for hydrogen, especially with regard to, the mobility in that area. Do you see, kind of the Pacific Northwest area being linked with the California market in the future, as far as, just kind of being on the same end of the country and things like that? Okay.
Yeah, yes, very much so. We can't, the Pacific Northwest, we are in no way, shape, or form separate from the state of California. A lot of our power flows to California. Some of their power flows back up. We're interconnected by an electricity grid. We're interconnected by highways. Mm-hmm. And to that point, right now, because California is really progressing on the hydrogen, in the hydrogen industry, they have about 50 hydrogen fueling stations in the state, with plans to build 250 more. And then Washington State, we have refueling stations they're about to be under construction and planned. And then we have Oregon, which is not moving quite as fast, so there's a gap. So we're working with California to say, how do we, it's a massive transportation corridor. When you have a state like California, which is the 5th largest economy in the world, there's a lot of goods that move back and forth and up and down the coast. So we really want to get that. We really want to transition off the diesel heavy duty vehicles and onto hydrogen. And we're working as a West Coast region to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, wonderful. Thanks for that info. So I want to then kind of address a question to Cornelius about looking at what steps do you think need to be taken to foster trade relationships to capitalize on the eventual surplus of hydrogen and green ammonia output from local and regional markets in the Middle East and Europe. And, kind of to this end, what work are your European and Middle Eastern trade groups doing to encourage this? And how are the EU policies on hydrogen aiding these efforts?
Yeah, it's a very important question, Adrienne. I think what Michelle mentioned on US sounds quite promising. So there are obviously price objectives, to get the price of green hydrogen down as fast as possible, which is the main factor. By the way, always important to outline that the price of green hydrogen will, by definition, have a downwards trend, whereas gray ammonia or gray hydrogen is always dependent on the fluctuation of the gas prices, which has been a concern of utilities for conventional power generation versus renewables. So that's a very important factor to mention. Now, here in the region and in Europe, I think, again, the most important work, obviously, by a public-private sector network, SDI, Desert Energy, is really to connect people, to provide the forum, to educate, with models, cases, economic, technical, and often connecting just the right people can, make miracles. And this is, I think, the main work here. Europe, as I mentioned, has a very ambitious hydrogen strategy, mainly made on green hydrogen. Countries like Germany have exclusively green hydrogen strategy, and all the key countries in Europe, basically, they have bold strategies. So I think in this respect, the macro job has been done, and hydrogen is a very important pillar to combat climate change, for the energy transition in the whole of Europe. So this is pretty much accomplished and undisputable. The phase we're in now is, we always call it getting from PowerPoint to power plant. We need concrete projects to initiate this circle, to bring down prices as fast as possible and come to concrete project as fast as possible. And in this respect, there is different initiatives. I can give an example. In Germany recently, part of the 9 billion euro national strategy, 63 projects from generation, transport, logistics, applications, they have been approved, and this is already now step by step in the process of becoming reality. On a European level, we've been, after the 2x40 gigawatt initiative last year, now privileged to support in the Hydrogen Act, and this is exactly what we need. We need a comprehensive policy framework with all the ingredients to make projects bankable, from the right regulatory scheme to certification schemes, and then eventually step by step towards creating markets, towards trading. So this is the big thing now in the region here. We are on the way to getting the bold national strategies. So we are a little bit behind in this respect, but I'm quite confident that in a year or two, things will move very fast here as well. And if you look on the project side, there's so much happening. So this will probably be a very exciting 2 years.
Okay, great. I think it will be very exciting 2 years as well. So moving on to looking at hydrogen as being a powerful enabler for the energy transition. Just in general, how do you see companies, industries, and governments being encouraged to invest and tap into the potential that hydrogen offers? Michelle, maybe you'd like to take that one.
Well, again, and from the U.S. perspective, because we are a bit behind the rest of the world, you have to make it a bit painful to not participate in a technology that is supposed to move you away from fossil fuels. So again, the region where I'm at is pretty far ahead of the rest of the United States as far as government policy that's sort of pushing industry to say, you have to do something different. And that really is, I mean, I've been a government affairs person for my entire career practically, and that's where my education is. And so using the tool of government policy and mandate is often how you push organizations, industries, sectors to do whatever it is you think they need to do. So I would wish that it doesn't all have to be stick, that some of it is carrot too. And that's where I think, incentives are key. And every other clean energy technology has had plenty of carrots and continues to get carrots in the US, so you have the wind and solar industry that still have the benefit of production tax credits. If you want to advance and you want to encourage industry to adopt hydrogen as an alternative to decarbonize, then you need to sort of offer the same tools, the same financial mechanisms. And I don't think that, often you hear from folks who sort of push back against hydrogen as one of the solutions. You get, oh, it's going to take too long. Oh, there's not enough. Oh, it's too expensive. And frankly, to me, those are sort of red herring arguments, right? People were saying the same thing about the advancement of solar and wind energy 20 years ago. And we figured out a way to overcome the obstacles. We figured out a way to overcome the barriers. We figured out a way to make it economic. And at least in the US, solar energy is now one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, sources of energy in the entire country. So we can get there.
Okay. And Cornelius, how do you see companies and industries and governments being encouraged to invest and tap into hydrogen potential in your regions?
Well, again, maybe to distinguish a little bit between the North African, Middle East region and Europe. So interestingly, 10 years ago, when we started here on energy transition, renewable energy, solar and wind was pretty exotic, expensive. The oil and gas producers, they said we don't need it actually. And then over the last 5 to 6 years, we've had a revolution at an increasing speed. Now, I think the last oil and gas producer has understood the message that things massively change. We produce solar energy here for 1 cent per kilowatt hour. That's the benchmark, even in countries with low bankability for less than 2 cents. So 1 to 2 cents for solar, 1.5 cents to maybe 2.5 cents for wind energy. And this is outpricing any conventional generation. And this is quite a revolution, which is accelerating now. And this is with zero subsidies. It is always reverse bidding. There's no single feed-in tariff here or any sort of support. So that's pretty interesting, and that's happening, and it will obviously be quite a disruptive decade in the region. Europe has had a different approach, particularly Germany was very high feed-in tariffs, 50 cents per kilowatt hour 20 years ago, and still today, paying a yearly bill of approximately 30 billion euros in terms of, the accumulated support of feed-in tariff. There have been different support schemes in Europe. I think on the hydrogen side, there is everything available which is needed. So there is R&D money available, there is huge funds, there is funds for making projects viable on generation. As I mentioned, the 63 projects, staying with the example in Germany, on the transport side, logistics side, and even application side. So there is, I think, all support needed available. I think what is needed is maybe a little bit more coordination on a European level. Europe sometimes is tough because many countries have completely different interests, different, power generation mixes, different industrial structures. So the interests sometimes are not that easy to align. So I think aligning and speaking with one voice, that's a big challenge which needs to be accomplished. And then, on trading, I think indirectly CO2 pricing, the CO2 price on a European level, this is quite a game changer now with, the price per ton above 60, and this needs to be again coordinated well with CO2 pricing in the countries. And I think CO2 pricing will be probably one of the biggest catalysts, to drive and to accelerate the energy transition and eventually the adoption of green hydrogen.
Yeah, absolutely. CO2 pricing has been something that I've heard many people mention as being critical to the furtherance of the sector. So definitely. And one last question I would like to address to both of you, and maybe to Cornelius first, because I know you had some ideas about this. So looking at how can hydrogen help to repurpose jobs in oil and gas as we go through the energy transition, or create new jobs? And then also, hand in hand with that, to create a market for hydrogen, especially with regard to trading schemes, which you just alluded to as well. So, in the Middle East and other regions. So what do you think about that?
That's a very interesting and important question, Adrian. So on jobs, obviously the big hope would have been that with the big solar and wind development now accelerating over the last few years, many jobs would have been created. So in terms of local manufacturing, this has been not so much the case as of yet. Of course, many construction and operation and maintenance jobs have been created. We made a first study on this, on localizing solar and wind in 2013. That's a long story. But what we found very recently in a study we published together with the consultancy Roland Berger just in June. So we looked at 3 GCC countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Oman, and we looked at whether hydrogen can really be the big new oil, and this focused on the job side and on the revenue side. So what we found is that there's a revenue potential long term of approximately $200 billion per year, only in the 3 GCC countries, and up to 1 million jobs could be created. And this is only 3 GCC countries. So we found very clearly that there is great capabilities, both infrastructure-wise, but from an HR point of view, with many capable people here, many bright minds that obviously will eventually lose their job in the oil and gas industry, because it will be a declining industry. And this is the big opportunity for hydrogen, to localize the very broad value chain, which is much broader than just for solar, wind only. And we're not only speaking about electrolysis as the core, we're coming down to applications, and there's a lot of other fields, in the entire hydrogen value chain, where many jobs and hydrogen valleys eventually, like in NEOM in Saudi Arabia, could be created. So that's a very important part. And to your market question, so obviously what we need to do now, we need to join forces and work towards the development of best global and not a regional market for green molecules. And what we need is obviously common standards, first of all, certifications of origin of low carbon hydrogen, best globally. We need a clear market mechanism. And one thing which I would like to outline as well, specifically separating the green origin, like we do for green electricity, where we trade green certificates. Doing the same for hydrogen would be an important accelerator, because you can partly resolve the transport question. For example, with Morocco or UAE, Saudi, Germany, you could temporarily just trade green certificates, where an off-taker in Germany or Europe pays the difference between gray and green, conventional and green hydrogen or molecules. And so basically separating the green characteristic from the physical product, that would be a very important point from our view. That's what we advocate, and we brought into H2 Global, the German organization now, which will source regional auctions via CFDs, significant amounts for Germany on green hydrogen.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cornelius. So Michelle, what do you think about as far as hydrogen helping to repurpose jobs in oil and gas as the energy transition marches on, or to create new jobs? And then also, if you have any ideas about creating the market for hydrogen, trading schemes, things like that.
And again, I agree with Cornelius 100%. So what I think about here in the US is those replacement jobs. So a lot of the government policy is pointing towards shutting down the coal industry. So many of particularly the investor-owned utilities in the West, are shutting down their coal plants sort of year by year by year. And that has a real economic impact on the regions and on the small towns where those coal plants are located. So you take a state like Wyoming, where you have a coal plant that is essentially in a very rural area. It employs 300, 400 people. The entire economy of the town, the school, the market, the laundromat, the coffee shop, everything is reliant on those jobs. And when those jobs go away, that entire town goes away. So you want to try to figure out how not to have that happen. And so as many people on this at this seminar may know, the Intermountain Power Project, which is the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Mitsubishi, and others that are developing the Delta, Utah project, which is a coal plant, which will be converted to a gas plant, which will eventually burn 100% hydrogen for power generation. And there are salt cavern storage for the hydrogen at that same site, and there will be on-site renewable power, an electrolyzer production of hydrogen. So those are technically coal plant jobs that would have gone away, save for this project. So I think that that's a great kind of one-to-one transition of how to save jobs, and frankly, how to save communities. What I think, what I'm in the process of sort of diving into these days is I've heard lots of statistics about how many jobs the green hydrogen sector could create globally and in the US. But what I don't know, and what I'm getting some questions about from policymakers is, are those additional jobs, or are those sort of one-to-one replacement jobs? And I don't know the answer to that yet. And if there's anybody who is listening who has those statistics, I would love them. And as far as, and the skills transfer piece, right? So if you're blending hydrogen into a natural gas distribution system, and then eventually, with any luck, we can go to 100% green hydrogen, you always need pipe fitters. And pipe fitters can deal with a pipe, no matter whatever the feedstock or whatever the fuel is that's going through that pipe. So that's a job, that's a job preservation thing. And then as far as markets, again, I agree with Cornelius, the sort of the common definitions, the standards, the regulations. We really need homogeneity and standardization of all those pieces. The definition for clean hydrogen in the US Infrastructure and Jobs Act, I believe, is 1 kilogram of hydrogen that can be produced with less than 2 kilograms of carbon emissions. And that's so much better than the colors. I mean, we at RHA are trying to get away from the colors, because the colors just confuse people. But yes, so to have the tracking and the monitoring and the regulations that say, yes, this molecule right here is green and we can prove it, is really, really important, particularly because, again, the resistance and the pushback from some environmental groups against hydrogen is this whole, well, it just perpetuates the fossil fuel industry. It's just the fossil fuel industry greenwashing. Well, then we need to get these things in place where we can prove that what we're doing is decarbonizing. And that's key.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I want to thank you, Michelle and Cornelius, for sharing your insights today on this panel about how industry groups and trade associations can help further the development and infrastructure and investment and policies for low carbon hydrogen and especially its applications in the energy transition and you know, as we further try to reduce the environmental impact of our energy usage. So thank you very much for being on our panel and for sharing your insights with our audience. And we appreciate having you with us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. It was a true pleasure, Adrienne and Michelle. Thanks.
Thanks all.